This morning, the end of the Trump years and the beginning of Biden. We'll talk to a Texas congressman from D.C. about what he expects this week. What will the most controversial bills be in the Texas legislature? An interesting excerpt from our extended interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. A Houston cop quits after getting busted inside the U.S. Capitol during the riots. Should police departments be doing more to vet those who wear the badge? Houston's Police Chief Art Acevedo is with us. And Texas Republicans cannot even agree on basic facts right now. How much of it is fear of upsetting Trump voters? A question we will ask on the Roundtable.
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. We are less than 100 hours away from a new president. We'll get to D.C. in a moment, but first, the top political headlines from across our state. At least 3 Texans are charged with taking part in the Capitol riot. One of them is a woman who ran for the mayor of Midland. Her name is Jenny Cudd. Federal prosecutors charged her in this document here a few days ago after the FBI pinpointed her in images inside the Capitol building. Jenny Cudd admits she was there, but she claims that she was not violent. Attorneys general from every single state in the country signed on to a couple of letters condemning the violence at the Capitol. Every single state except Texas. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton did not sign either letter. Paxton has condemned the violence on social media, though, after first falsely saying Antifa was behind it. It was not Antifa, law enforcement says. The violent mob was radical Trump supporters. And 2 Texas congressmen in high-profile positions. Congressman Joaquin Castro, a Democrat from San Antonio, is one of the House lawmakers to manage the impeachment against President Trump. And separately, Congressman Filemon Villa there, he got a big appointment as well. He got appointed as the co-chair of the Democratic National Committee. He's a Democrat from Harlingen. Let's stay in D.C. for a moment now. The presidential inauguration is Wednesday, normally a festive time, but this year's will be unlike any inauguration we have seen before. 20,000 armed National Guard troops are in D.C. preparing for the potential of political violence. Our first guest has worked around it all over the last couple of weeks and wants to look ahead to a Biden administration. It's Congressman Colin Allred, a Democrat from Dallas who represents North Dallas and all of northeastern Dallas County. Congressman, it's good to see you this morning. You are there in D.C. Let's start with some of the most recent news over the last couple of days here. Federal prosecutors are now saying that pro-Trump mob wanted to capture and assassinate members of Congress. You were on the House floor that day. It was a frightening time. Looking back now, what do you think about what prosecutors are now saying?
Well, Jason, thank you for having me on. And, I think that's right. It appeared to me at the time that they were trying to get on the House floor to try and prevent us from doing our constitutional duty and to capture us. We saw, of course, the images of people roaming on the Senate floor with zip ties. So I think that's right. This wasn't just an attempt to get into the Capitol and to stage a protest. They were there for violence.
Congressman, in your second term now, you have earned a reputation for working with the other side. One of the top Democrats to do that, and you have good friends on the other side. I'm curious, since all this has happened, have you spoken to them? And if so, what are those conversations like?
Yeah, well, I have. And, I'm still going to be friends with some of the folks in the Texas delegation who I've worked with. But this is going to cause a difficulty in the Congress because what's at stake here and what happened wasn't just, about a policy issue or an ideological view of how to approach something. It was about whether or not you believe in our elections, whether or not you believe in our democracy. And I am extremely disappointed in all of my colleagues, any of them who voted that night after everything that happened to try and overturn the results of the election. I think that was the wrong thing to do. But as you know, I was born and raised in my district here in North Texas. I'm always going to do what's best for us. I'll work with anyone to deliver for us. But I do hope that at some point we can all start working from the same fact sheet about what happened in this election and going forward. Because if we don't have the same facts, I don't know how we're going to end up with the same conclusions.
Congressman, if any of your colleagues in the House or the Senate for that matter are found to have been involved with any of this, if they are later on, should those individuals be thrown out of Congress?
Well, they should, and I think they should also face criminal prosecution. This was a deadly riot, and some friends of mine, folks who I said hi to every morning, had their lives at risk trying to save my life, the lives of my colleagues, and really to protect our democracy. One Capitol Police officer is dead, another one committed suicide. We have another that may lose an eye, others that have concussions. I mean, the damage of this is going to continue to come out, and I think the people of Texas, the people of the country are going to see just how violent what happened in the Capitol was. If you played any role in that, then you should be held to account for it.
I want to talk politics real quickly here as well, too, Congressman. Joe Biden's pandemic relief package has stimulus checks for $1,400 to individuals. The left flank of the Democratic Party, I'm sure you well know, say that's not enough money. It should be $2,000 like the House already approved. Which one do you support?
Well, what we're trying to do, of course, is to give the $2,000 that we initially talked about. We got $600 in the last deal of the year, and we're trying to add that $1,400 to get to the $2,000. Of course, we understand that the American people are struggling and that they need as much help as possible. The most important thing that President-elect Biden talked about this week, I think, is his plan to roll out this vaccine efficiently to make sure that we get past this virus, because no amount of aid of any kind is going to allow us to outspin this virus. The most important thing we can do for our economy, for our families, for our businesses is to beat the virus. And to do that, we have to roll out this vaccine efficiently and protect people in the meantime.
All right, Congressman Colin Allred, Dallas Democrat, good to see you. Thanks for making time for us, and stay safe up there.
Thanks, Jason.
Let's shift our attention now to the Texas legislature. It officially gavelled back into session last week. The House elected a new speaker, Dade Phelan, a Republican from Beaumont. But overshadowing opening day was the coronavirus and cops. 100 state troopers in riot gear after the FBI warned of the potential for political violence from the radical right. And it led Ross Ramsey to write 4 words in his column for the Texas Tribune this week: make government boring again. Ross, I'm with you, man. Good to see you. Ross is in Austin for us.
Sometimes a column is just a life support system for a headline. That wouldn't work that way.
Who doesn't support that right now? Yeah, let's talk about the legislature for a moment, because lawmakers will have about $1 billion less to work with. That's probably not likely to lead to any big cuts or new sources of revenue like casinos or legalizing pot, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, Glenn Hager came in with a revenue estimate, a forecast of the state's income that was a little bit more optimistic, actually a lot more optimistic than a lot of legislators expected. It eases the pressure on big spending cuts, and it also eases pressure to find new sources of revenue, whether that's, weed or casinos or whatever.
Talk about the latest twist in the legal saga for Attorney General Ken Paxton. He says there's a Texas law, the Whistleblower Act, that does not apply to him.
He says he's not a state employee. Actually, his lawyers for the agency are saying he's not a state employee. He's an elected office holder, and that whistleblower statutes don't apply to him. This is a novel argument. I'm not a lawyer, but the lawyers I've talked to have said this is going to be a tough one to sell, but that's the argument they're making.
Wow, incredible. All right, Ross, back to you in a moment. Thank you. Coming up, words matter. A reflective interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick after the Capitol riot by the radical right. And a veteran Houston police officer busted for participating in the riot at the Capitol. His boss, Chief Art Acevedo, is with us from Houston when we come back. You're watching Inside Texas Politics. Let's turn to the Texas legislature for a moment. Lots of questions in the opening week. Will we see any controversial bills this session? Is the Senate trying to limit Democratic voices? And how much has the violence in Washington impacted Austin? Just after the legislature gavelled back into session last week, we did an extended interview with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, the state's #2 Republican. This morning, we wanted to share an excerpt. Governor Patrick, good to see you. Let's start out with what happened in Washington, D.C. and the riots up there by the radical right. I'm curious, you saw what we all saw. Did any of that change you?
No, it just makes us all more aware of what happens when people say things they shouldn't say. And I'm not talking just about the president, Jason. I'm talking about even Democrats go all the way back to George Floyd. We've had riots in the streets, police stations burned, buildings burned and looted, and it was kind of condoned by the Democrats. And then now you have the right upset and mad, and not condoned by any Republicans. In fact, I think the Republicans have been very strong against it. But as I said, I wrote this missive called Enough. You can find it at danpatrick.org. Click the updates to read it so it makes sense to you. But I said, look, these were Trump supporters. This was not Antifa, because Antifa would have been wearing masks to conceal their identity. So whether it's on the left or the right, what's important about leaders, Republicans and Democrats, congressmen and presidents and governors and lieutenant governors, is leaders are meant to calm a crisis, not create one.
Governor, Austin works better than Washington for the most part.
Yeah, we do.
But let me ask you about the rule change in the Senate, because it used to take 21 votes or 20 votes to get a piece of legislation to the floor of the Senate for consideration. Then it was 19 because the Republicans lost a seat. Right. Now it's 18 that you guys just passed. Yes. We're hearing from some Democrats who say, well, listen, this is partisanship at its greatest, and you're just blocking out Democratic voices.
Yeah. So it's hogwash. And the media, most of the media repeats their hogwash. Here's the deal, Jason. We are still a majority Republican state. Every statewide elected official, we held all our seats in the House, and we still have an 18-13 majority in the Senate. The reason, when it was a 21-vote blocker bill, there were only 20 senators, so that meant 11 Democrats, because you had to have 21 votes to bring a bill to the floor. There were only 31 senators. 11 Democrats were in control of the Senate. Even though we had 20 Republicans against 11 Democrats, they controlled everything. That's why it was called the blocker bill. It's not about us shutting down their voice. It's about them blocking out the voice of the majority, because we are a Republican state. But here's the news that the media never reports, Jason. We passed, according to Brian Hughes on the Senate floor yesterday, we passed 1,819 bills last session. Only 18 out of 1,800 and whatever the number was passed with only Republican votes. So the idea that Democrats, people would think, what did Patrick just say? 18 out of over 1,800 passed with only Republican votes. That means 99.99% had Democrat and Republican bipartisanship.
Do you expect redistricting to get done in the regular session, or will that go to a special session like it has in the past?
So normally, we do that every 10 years, we do the census. So Normally we get the numbers from the federal government in March or April. We're told now we may not get the numbers till June or July. So our session ends on May 31st. So I expect, now maybe they'll pull off a miracle and get the numbers to us, but it takes us a while. We'll start hearings, but it takes us a while once we get the numbers to draw the maps. We have to redo the congressional maps, the Senate maps, the House maps, and we're going to do the appellate court maps. But that's not based on census. That's based on caseload of courts, the caseloads in the courts. So I would expect we'll be in Austin much of the summer.
Governor Patrick, we appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jason.
Patrick's entire unedited interview is at WFAA.com/Inside Texas Politics. Now to Houston and the largest police department in the state. A veteran Houston police officer, an Asian American, busted for taking part in the Capitol riot. Are more like him in this department? This morning, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo. Chief Acevedo, thank you for the time. Let's start out with what this officer was in D.C. for, to your knowledge. What is your understanding of what the officer did there in the Capitol?
He was there to support, my understanding, he was there to support the president. And at some point he decided to go past barriers, force his way past officers, and enter the Capitol building. And quite frankly, that is participating in an act of sedition, if you ask me, and he will be facing criminal charges. He was supposed to do a disciplinary hearing with me this past Friday, but he resigned on Thursday, so he won't have to face the internal consequences, but he will ultimately be facing federal charges.
And Chief, I think you pointed out this was an Asian American officer. It wasn't a white officer that was up there. Is it your understanding, though, that he actually, beyond trespassing and going, without authorization into a building like that, did he actually commit any violence up there?
That's part of the ongoing investigation, joint investigation with the Joint Terrorism Task Force that our one of our sergeants is on. He's a co-investigator, and that's something that they're still looking into. But for a police officer to actually engage in any criminal activity, especially an attack on our nation's capital, it's unconscionable, it's inexcusable. And I hope he and other members of law enforcement and the military, or other people that have actually taken an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States, face the severest consequences allowable by law.
Chief, I'm sure since all this came to your attention, you've had to be thinking about this next question. As the chief of the largest police department in the state here, how do you root this out? How do you vet officers to make sure that this isn't going on in the background?
Well, I think that what we do is we continue to monitor their social media. We continue to conduct thorough investigations in terms of the background investigations for the hiring process. But as they move through their career, we just continue to monitor their activity, their actions in terms of what they're saying and doing across the social media platforms out here. But at the end of the day, we need the public's help.
And Chief, the FBI is warning of the potential of more violence. Are you prepared for anything there in Houston?
Yeah, we started our tactical alert on Friday, which means we're in a modified tactical alert. Our red books, which is signing up for days off, have been closed starting on the 15th this past Friday through the inauguration, where we will go ahead and we will reevaluate the threat. But we're all going to be all hands on deck. Everyone other than those who have an operational need to be undercover will be in uniform. You'll see a high visibility, and I think that you're going to see that not just in Houston, but across the state of Texas and across the nation. This is a time for vigilance. It's a time for us to come together. And it's a time for us to be Americans above all else and show a commitment to the rule of law and show a commitment to this nation. As imperfect as it is, it's still the greatest nation on earth, and we never need to forget that.
And Chief, last question about the legislature, your old city over there in Austin. Final moments here. Criminal justice is coming up in the legislature again this year, more reforms to that potentially. What are you looking for lawmakers to do this session?
We have got to we've got to deliver reform to the community, because at the end of the day, with everything that happened last year, with the death of George Floyd, if we don't provide some reform, we're going to see potentially more protest and even more violence. And it's important for the community to know we made a commitment to those protesters here in Houston that we were going to join them in calling on reform. And I've actually setting up a meeting for the end of the month here in January with activist groups, ACLU types, NAACP, to actually come together and see what we can join together to put some pressure on our legislative leaders and our constitutional officers and the governor and lieutenant governor.
All right. Chief Acevedo, good to see you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Have a great year.
When we come back here, Texas Republicans cannot agree on basic facts right now. Are some of them afraid that telling the truth will upset Trump voters? We're going to delve into that next on the Roundtable.
This is Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley.
Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Ross Ramsey is back with us from Austin and the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy joins us for this segment each week from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And of course, Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas, is here. Ross, let's start with you. And that big business backlash all across the country from businesses that support President Trump. People are upset at those people, but we didn't really see a lot of that in Texas. Why not?
We didn't see Texas companies do it because partly because it's a Trump state, partly because, the businesses that have a lot of Texas interests, some of them are on that list. You get some of these national corporations and they're as much Texas as Iowa or California or whatever. That's
a good point there, Bud. Is it surprising to you at all, though?
Well, it's almost as if Texas has already seceded. It's like, that Texas is still very much in the Trump corner. And it's almost as if all the backlash against Trump and anyone who supported him really doesn't apply here. You especially see it in the churches, where you still have churches like we saw in the Dallas area this week, where the pastors are talking about how there's going to be an insurrection and a Christian uprising, and the pastors getting almost no pushback.
Bernadine, that's phenomenal to me to hear, but at the end of the day, Texas kind of still is Trump country, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And then it will be for a while until you see some of the statewide races going more into the Democratic column. But as of now, all of the statewide races, the Republican Party is still strong here. So you're not going to see much of a pushback.
Let's talk about Republicans as a whole in our state and how they can't really agree on basic facts. And Ross, question, we'll begin this topic with you. Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton, the Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor, for example, they differ on who it was that attacked the Capitol, whether it was Antifa, like Paxton said, or Trump supporters, like Patrick said. What's the disconnect? Are they afraid of upsetting Trump voters? Is that what it really comes down to?
Well, I think, Paxton was up there for the rally. He wasn't part of the crowd that went to the Capitol, but he initially took the position that these were Antifa people and just never came off of it. Patrick never got stuck in that position. He waited until some of the facts were out and I think properly identified them as pro-Trump supporters.
Bud?
Republicans are stuck. They're a substantial portion of the party that not the voters, but the grassroots precinct chairs and the people who really run the party. They're QAnon adherents, conspiracy addicts. They believe in all the. They believe there's about to be an overthrow to put Trump back in charge. So Republicans are trying to walk the line when the core of their party, the delegates that go to the convention, are really split over whether to be normal or to be crazy.
Again, Bernardine, I lead off the same question with you. It's phenomenal to me that we are in this situation that the GOP is split like this.
Well, it's split, but keep in mind, Paxton, it would be difficult for him to come off of that cliff that he has himself on, because he was one of the few Texans who did get involved in pushing facts that were not true. Now, Lieutenant Governor Patrick really didn't get on that bandwagon, so he's safe saying that the facts are it was Trump supporters who did the riots in D.C. So I think that you have those who didn't take such a strong position with President Trump can easily say that the facts are President-elect Biden won the race.
Indeed, he did win the race, and he'll be inaugurated on Wednesday. Guys, thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you watching as well. The inauguration is on Wednesday. We hope you can join us back here next Sunday, though, for another episode of Inside Texas Politics. Have a good day.